Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Now for a review of President Buhari's business-related trip to Japan and his latest charm offensive on trade directed at yet another Asian economic giant. We're now being joined by Muda Yusuf, the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. A strong advocate of private sector development, Mr. Yusuf will now tell us how much of a gamble that Nigeria is taking by flirting with the Asian giants at the expense of our traditional partners from the West. Welcome to the program, Muda Yusuf.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. You're welcome. Well, President Buhari attended the Tokyo International Conference for African Development, TICAD. He just returned to Nigeria. And one of the major issues on the sidelines of that conference was President Buhari engaging the business community and the government of Japan to say that Nigeria is the best investment destination in Africa and that there are opportunities here in a number of sectors, health, infrastructure, power, renewable energy, and it was inviting the Japanese. And then, of course, there was this idea of Nigeria-Japan Trade Facilitation Council. What's your assessment of President Buhari's participation at this year's TICAD in terms of the trade and investment, drive?
Well, I believe it was a good move. I was also in TICAD. I was at the conference. And, of course, there were a lot of opportunities that such platforms present. There are opportunities at the business level, at least getting the private sector players to also engage with their counterparts in Japan, because quite a number of them are actually very keen about investing in Africa. There was also a business expo on the sidelines, where the private sector players also interacted a great deal. It was quite a big expo. Then there is, of course, the economic angle to it. That is the interaction, between the governments and development finance institutions. But quite a number of multilateral agencies were also there, not just the government of Japan. We had the World Bank, UNIDO, UNDP. Quite a number of them were there. And there were a lot of engagements, not just at the federal level, even at the state level. Because I was part of the Lagos State team, and we had the opportunity of meeting with some development finance institutions in South Africa, with the governor of Lagos State. And there were also a lot of such things. So for an economy like ours that needs a lot of support, a lot of financing, I think it's an opportunity. Because Japan is the third largest economy, The economy is worth about $5 trillion US. China, of course, is bigger. It's about $15 trillion US. Of course, the biggest, is United States. It's about $21 trillion US. So for an economy that has financing challenges, that has very serious infrastructure deficits. Infrastructure deficits in Nigeria today, on an annual basis, about $31 billion US, which is even bigger than the entire budget of the federal government. So that speaks to the fact that we need a lot of support, not just going to borrow money. It's also about equity financing, because when we present opportunities like this, it's not enough to just ask them to borrow us money, because we have a lot of issues already, financing debt. But we need to encourage them to come forward, and we also need to present projects that are bankable, especially in the infrastructure space. Because if you have any problem, really, that is impeding progress today, the biggest one is the infrastructure situation. Of course, we have policy issues, we have some institutional issues, but the biggest of them all is infrastructure. And clearly, the government doesn't have the finances. And it's not just in Nigeria, it's an African problem. Because the African deficit in infrastructure was estimated by the African Development Bank to be about $108 billion US annually. That's of deficit in Africa. So a lot of African countries were there. Close to 20 African heads of states were there. all of them are at least also seeking an opportunity. So I think the president has done well to go there. It's like a marketing trip. It's like, you have to market your country. You have to tell them what opportunities there are for investors to come. But that is the only way we can progress this economy. That is also one way where we can create jobs and attract investment. Of course, we have a lot to do on the home front to actually make these things crystallize. Because at the end of the day, a businessman will not just jump on the plane and come and invest here. Due diligence will still have to be done. Risk assessments will have to be done and all of that. So as a country, we have a responsibility to ensure that we improve the risk environment. Because why we are not having many of these investors, especially from places like Japan and even from the West, is because of the risk environment. The environment is perceived to be very risky. And when you have such environment, you only are able to attract investors that have very high appetite for risk. And that is also not the best. You also want some investors that feel more comfortable with you. They may be comfortable with some small margins, but the environment has to give some comfort.
Yeah.
All those things are important.
Very important. You mentioned the president marketing the country, essentially, which is what it is. And one way in which he marketed Nigeria was by claiming that we have the highest return on investments in Africa. And that was a point that was put out there, and it became a focal point for a lot of people, given the current states of investments in Nigeria today. What is your take on this? Do you think our ROI is that strong? Can we really convince investors, potential investors, that that is where we stand?
Well, for some investors, really, the kind of profit they make here, they hardly can make anywhere else in the world. And look at the telecom story, for instance. By the time the telecoms investors came here, initially there was a lot of lethargy, especially from the from the Western investors. The perception of risk was so high. But those who took the challenge, who were able to take the risk, the kind of returns they are having today, many of them don't have it even in their own home country. So there are sectors in which returns are very good. And normally, even in the investment space, when you have an environment that has a fairly high risk profile, a lot of people get scared and they run away from that environment. So the few people that are able to come in, they often have the opportunity of making a lot of profit. So it's a risk and return thing. Quite a number of them are doing well, and generally in Africa. But the challenge is that the risk appetite of many of the investors from the West, in Japan, and many of these advanced economies, the risk appetite is very low. And many of them, because, again, they are using private capital, unlike what you have in China, where you have a lot of state finance that supports them. So they're able to be more aggressive, they are more bullish because they have the support of the state behind them. So that is what makes the difference. So just as I said, in order to make progress in actually attracting investment, we need to de-risk the environment. And that's a major issue. And that is why it is also important for policymakers not to think that they know everything about managing the economy. It is good to engage those who are investors in the economy, to identify cross-cutting issues, and also brainstorm on what kind of strategies are appropriate for this kind of environment to solve some problems. It's also important to look at even sector-specific issues, because it is those who are investing in that sector that can tell you the way forward for that sector. Well, we are not doing enough of that here, and that is part of the problem that we have in this economy. There is no sufficient engagement with those who are investors in the stakeholders.
Yeah, well, you've talked a lot about risk, managing the risk environment. Now, when President Buhari was in Japan, he also held a meeting in Yokohama with the Nigerian community. And he talked about how Nigerians should be good ambassadors abroad and, all of that. And he commended those of them doing very well. But the chairman of that community, when he was responding, he said, look, the Japanese are very skeptical about the security situation in Nigeria. And that's one of the reasons why they are not so enthusiastic about the Nigerian market. That's the private investors, the private sector in Japan. But we had a gentleman on this program, and we posed that same question to him, and he said, security is not even a very big concern to an investor, that it's profit. If they see that they can make profit in any environment, even if it's a war zone.
He said that sometimes the insecurity is what even fuels them to want to enter this
here you are talking about, the risk and how much of a threat it could be to investment. I know risk does not mean security alone. It's one of the elements. Yeah. Yeah. But what do you think?
Well, when we look at the investment environment, it depends on what kind of investors you also want to attract. There are some investors that thrive even better in situations where you have a lot of risk, including security risk. Because to some extent, it confers some level of monopoly situation. Because many other people are scared and they leave the terrain, they leave the scene. And the few people that are on ground, take advantage of that. But of course, perception is also very important. I mean, if you read the news, and generally in the media, with due respect, it is some of these bad things that actually make good stories. That there's a bomb here, there is Boko Haram there is, attack in the Niger Delta. Those are the things that make the headlines. And those things actually scare away investors. But for investors that are bullish, that have very high risk appetite, they still come forward. Because, if you strike gold or if you strike oil, even in Borno and all these Boko Haram, investors will go there. They just go there, but what is important is for you to construct a business model that will allow you to function in that zone. We have investors in the Niger Delta, even at the peak of all this militancy and all of that. People are still there doing business. They didn't leave. Yeah. And also it's a question of, constructing the right kind of business model. But that is not to diminish the fact that it is not a good thing that you have that kind of negative perception.
Absolutely.
It's not a good thing at all.
We'll go on a very quick break, and as soon as we come back, the conversation will continue. Stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show. Muda Yusuf, the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, is still here in the studio with us. Now, we're talking about the conference that went on in Tokyo, and I'd like to pose a question to you, because it seems as though people are more comfortable with the idea of having investment coming in from Japan than we seem to be about investments from China, because a lot of people think that Chinese investments that have come in have kind of modeled neocolonialism to a certain extent. What is your take on this as well? And what is your take on China's investment portfolio in Nigeria?
Well, for any economy, I think what is important is to know what you want, either as a government or even as a private sector entity. To the extent that we have investment policies that are right, that guide the kind of investment that comes into the country, to the extent that we have the right kind of institutions to ensure that there is compliance with our investment laws, investment rules, and to the extent that we're able to align whatever investment we are bringing into the country with our own national objectives. I think no matter where the investment is coming from, what is important is to be sure that it is consistent with our own national interests.
So do you see any sort of neo-colonial undertone?
I don't see that. For as long as, this is a sovereign state. Unless we also don't know what exactly we are doing. If you have a leadership that knows what it's doing, nobody can impose anything on you. We are not under any serious pressure. It's not an emergency situation. You can decide what kind of investment you want. And when the investors come, you should also be able to dictate or to give guidelines as to, okay, this is how I want you to impact on this economy. This is the category of staff I want Nigerians to be part of this process. This is the kind of staff that you can bring into the country. There are all sorts of guidelines that you can put in place to ensure that you get the best value for the citizens from any investment that is coming. Right now, the bulk of the investment we are having in this economy are portfolio investments, which don't bring much value, which some people regard as hot money, which sometimes can be very destabilizing. And it's not so fantastic for the economy because at the snap of any dislocation in the system, this capital will just reverse. And once they reverse, they leave a very big hole in the economy and cause a lot of instability. Well, so the emphasis should be on first creating the right kind of environment to get the right kind of investment. Secondly, to also have the right kind of investment policy. That, okay, we have strengths, we have sectors in which we have competencies, we have sectors in which we can bring a lot of value addition, where there can be a lot of multiplier effect, where a lot of jobs can be created, and you channel your investment policy in that direction.
See, so there seems to be a geopolitical side with this, what I describe, the emerging scramble for Africa and the competition between Japan and China and the Western countries for Africa, seen as a land of, a continent of trade opportunities. Now, I mean, China was conspicuously absent in TICAD in Yokohama. You know that story about Japan taking on China. But you now have African countries. Yes, they're looking for money. Japan is offering $50 billion. In Kenya, when they had the conference for the first time in Africa, they offered $13 billion. This year, they've increased it to $15 billion. And that's why you see many of our presidents going there trying to see who can get a better share of that money. But as I said, the model with Japan is different from that of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. And it's different from what we're traditionally used to in our engagement with the West. Now, with all these models and the geopolitics of it, what kind of safeguards should African countries think about? How do they engage with these different models? How do they protect themselves? More so as we have seen that there's some kind of economic imperialism tied to all these efforts to engage Africa.
Well, I believe it's a matter of being strategic in the way we deal with these countries, and in the way we also get engaged with them. First, I think we should be laying more emphasis on equity investment. Because this idea of getting into debts, borrowing money, and all of that, even though some of these funds are concessionary, we have to be very careful.
Low interest rates.
Low interest rates, long tenure, and all of that. Some of them very good moratorium. But first, we need to be sure exactly if you take their money, what you are using the money for. Because some of the challenges we have in our own space is that you take some of these monies, you throw it into your budget, and the budget is about 70-75% recurrent, and before you know it, the recurrent side consumes everything. So I think as a matter of strategy, and this is also contained even in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, that whatever you borrow must be spent specifically on infrastructure and capital projects, particularly capital projects that have the capacity to improve the productivity in the economy. Because if you take such monies or take such interventions and it's invested in areas where productivity can be enhanced, because as productivity increases, your GDP increases. As GDP increases, your capacity to even service debts will also increase. Employment will increase. Revenue will increase. A lot of things will happen. But if we continue to just jump into any facility, just take the money, and there is no proper accounting or accountability that follows it, then we continue to dip ourselves, in a very deep hole of struggling now to either pay debts, asking for debt forgiveness, and all of that. So we have to actually be well focused on our own side, to be very discreet in the kind of engagement, in the kind of debt, in the kind of support that we get. And the Western countries have not been quite bullish. They are a bit laid back when it comes to issues of Africa and all of that. So, and the space has, even our colonial masters, until recently, nothing more was happening in terms of trade and investment, in terms of support. Unlike what we are having from the East, China and Japan and all of. They are more aggressive. I mean, this TICAD started in 1993. That's 26 years ago. Even before China even woke up to this issue of being aggressive about Africa. So it shows how far-sighted some of these leaders in this country are. But what is important is for those in charge of our own governance to know exactly what we want and to get the right kind of technical advice on what to take and what not to take. That is what I think should happen.
Absolutely. And on that note, just for some public enlightenment, what are the key sectors as well that we're looking into in terms of investments from Asian countries? What are the key sectors in the country right now that investment is tapping into?
For me, what is most critical is how to get them to invest in infrastructure. Because that is one of the biggest headaches that you have. You're talking of power, you're talking of roads, you're talking of railway system and all of that. Because if you have infrastructure rights, a lot of problems will be fixed in this economy. And beyond that, of course, we have our oil and gas sector. We have not been optimally utilizing that big potential.
What about tech?
Across the entire chain.
What about tech? Doctor, wouldn't you think that tech would be one of...
Technology.
Yes.
I mean,
the digital space.
If you talk of Japan, these are the kind of things they are bringing.
Yeah,
they are very strong in those areas, in the tech space, in the automobile space, and they also have reputation for quality.
Anyway, before we bring this to a close, I mean, you have, with the Chamber of Trade and Commerce, and the issue about the closure of the border with Benin. One of the things that President Buhari tried to address when he met with the Beninois president, Patrice Talon, also in TICAD. And, in the newspapers, traders have been mooning, they've been groaning, they've been saying, look, closing down the border for 28 days without prior notice is punitive. It doesn't make sense. What's your take? Because you are involved in trade and commerce.
Well, my president, the president of the chamber was here.
Yes, he was here, yes.
3 days ago. And I just want to reiterate his position that closing the border will not solve the problem. For me, it's a very simplistic approach to a very complicated, deep-rooted, and multi-dimensional problem. And that is why I said that in taking some of these actions, there is need for proper consultation and engagement so that the quality of government interventions in the policy space, in some of these spaces, can be better enriched. Some of these decisions only go to penalize the law-abiding Nigerians because it drives a lot of businesses underground. We have a system that is rewarding those who are cutting corners, those who are doing all sorts of funny things, and that is not good for the growth of the economy. I mean, before I got here, some of the multinational company has called me that they have 6 or 10 trucks lined up of exports that is supposed to go from Nigeria to the neighboring countries.
Thank you very much.
They are stuck at the border.
Muda Yusuf, thank you very much indeed.